when we become afraid that there's a threat to our way of life or that we're going to lose something that we care about, that's when we tend to lose a lot of logic in decision making, and we tend to do things that we regret later or that are abhorrent, like what's happening here. So, what's up? Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name is Kason.
And as you can see, we are recording separately today. So I'm going to keep my camera on that angle right there for most of this, and I'll just switch back and forth like it is. Thank you for joining us. This is probably going to be our last episode here, episode 5 of our Bioshock analysis. Real quick, before we jump into this, Kason and I kind of agreed after recording last week's episode that things did not really feel up to kind of the standard we hold for the show.
Yeah, that's our standard.
So I've actually gone back since last week, and I've gone through the entire script again. And most importantly, I wanted to do Arcadia, Farmer's Market, and beyond, because those were the parts I felt like were a little bit lacking in terms of analysis. I feel like we did good for the beginning of the game. So I've taken some notes from Arcadia and Farmer's Market and Fort Frolic again and Hephaestus. Funny enough, I'd like to start there because there's not as many notes in the closing chapters, I feel like. There's not as much there to really chew on as there are in other areas of the game. So we're going to be stepping backwards a bit for the first part of today's episode, and then we'll continue on through the end of the game. But there's a few things specifically that I either glossed over as I was scrolling through the script while we were recording, or that I physically missed, like I just didn't find the diary naturally in my playthrough, that I found now or have read now that gives some pretty crucial context to a couple of cool things that I want to mention. So we're going to do that first, but I want to pass it over to you, Kason, real quick, just to say if there's anything you wanted to say in regards to that, things that you've read in the comments or anything you'd want to address.
Yeah. I will say I have gotten more things wrong on this podcast than any other podcast, and not like predictions, just like, general stuff, just talking about things here and there. This has been very challenging for me. I also didn't know, I found out very recently that Bioshock 2 features a very different premise with a villain that is possibly almost the exact opposite of Bioshock 1, and that I didn't need to be trying to steelman Ayn Rand and play devil's advocate this whole time. It will naturally happen when we play the sequels to the game. So I wish I knew that ahead of time. So knowing that fact, and I mentioned last episode, I'm not happy with any of my attempts to defend Ayn Rand. And I kind of make both sides angry when that happens. So apologies, won't be doing it anymore. And yeah, I'm excited. Let's go back to Arcadia.
Okay, great. All right, so I just have a couple of notes for Arcadia. I think we pretty sufficiently covered that section, but there was one really early diary you can find called Seeing Ghosts. This was brought up by Chocolate Rob, but then, of course, as I was reading through the diary entries again, I found this one and it's like, I think I actually physically missed this one while I was playing the game because it's really early on that you find it. Yeah. It's from Bill McDonough. He says, seems like some poor blighters have started seeing ghosts. Ghosts. Ryan tells me it's a side effect of this plasmid business. One poor sod's memory is getting passed on to another through genetic sampling, leaks, lunatics, rebellion, and now bleeding ghosts. Ain't life in rapture grand. So this is kind of explaining the visions that Jack sees as you're walking around through certain areas. These are not necessarily his own memories.
Yeah, they're not flashbacks. I thought they were, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's the image of the photograph of his parents that will pop up, really quickly now and then. And that one is the one that's in his wallet, right? That was the imprinted memory that that was given to him during his, conditioning by by Fontaine. But the ghostly images we're seeing are not necessarily Jack's memories. Those are bleeding over from other residents of Rapture. So it's more used as a device to show you what might have happened in this area before you got here, right? Kind of some of the events leading up to the war and the destruction that we're seeing now.
Well, that's kind of cool. So in that sense, it is a flashback. It's just not a flashback from Jack's memories.
Correct, yes.
It's almost like an objective flashback from just the world,
Right.
kind of going backwards, and time is getting confused. I think that's cooler, actually. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that's that is sort of where you get that explanation for what those little ghostly visions he's seeing are. It comes from the Arcadia section. So thank you, Rob, for pointing that out. I think that is an important thing to bring up to kind of clear up like the whole thing with Jack and imprinted memories and what is and is not real and whatnot.
One more thing that Rob also has corrected us on is that in the beginning you mentioned this is I think podcast episode 5. Chocolate Rob is saying it is actually episode 6.
Wait, did we just put up 5?
We already put up 5.
I got confused. Okay, so this will be 6. You're right.
This will be 6.
Rob's on top of
Rob,
everything.
man, he's on top of it. By the way, everyone watching the podcast, this has been very good. Chocolate Rob's comments are really good, and they're long, they're in depth. You guys, everybody who watches these episodes, specifically for this game, I think, but probably in general for all the games we played, you should go and read Chocolate Rob's comments. He's got some really good analysis going on down there.
Okay, so the other diary entry that I took down from this section that I don't think we touched on is from Diane McClintock. And I wanted to go over this because Diane gets a few more audio diaries here in the last couple areas. And she's a character we've been following from the very beginning. I think hers was the very first audio diary you get in the game, actually. The one where she talks about being alone on New Year's Eve, and then there was the attack and she gets shot. So she's kind of a character we've followed through every area, and that's not been true of the other characters. A lot of characters, their audio logs are specifically within only certain places. So what's really great about kind of where her story goes is it kind of goes along with a lot of what we've already been saying on the podcast about abandoning one extremist ideology for another.
Yes.
So
flip on the other end.
Right. So I want to kind of read this one because it leads up to some of what we're going to read about in today's episode. So this one is called Heroes and Criminals. And she says, I couldn't believe how much things had changed since I left Dr. Steinman's office. So if you'll remember, she got shot and she went to Dr. Steinman, the crazy surgeon guy from the medical pavilion, the first level, right? To get some surgery done, and he ended up messing her up even worse because he had already decided that he wanted to do Picasso work on people at that point, right? So he's actually, messed up her face. So ever since she left Steinman's office, it's like I don't even recognize Rapture no more. I hear they've been rounding up people in Apollo Square. I asked Ryan how he could do such things to innocents. So she's starting to see Ryan's betrayal of his own ideals and the fact that he's doing some pretty horrific things to keep his power. She's starting to see that, right? He said, innocents? If they haven't chosen to defend Rapture, they've chosen to side with Atlas and his bandits. So there are no innocents. There are heroes and there are criminals. So at this point, Ryan is sort of like almost gone to, well, if we're looking at the political quadrants, right, we have the x-axis with the authoritarian and libertarian, and then, of course, the y-axis is that, and then the x-axis is liberal and conservative. So I'm talking polar opposite on the y-axis. So he's gone from libertarian all the way up to authoritarian.
Yeah.
And so he's become more of like a nationalist fascist mindset rather than the sort of like extreme far bottom right libertarian mindset.
And that almost naturally happens when you build something. We talked before about how Andrew Ryan went from trying to subvert the order of the governments around him to trying to preserve his order of his government system that he's set up. He went from subverting order to preserving it. And that's almost a natural conservative tendency. So once he's built something that he likes, he doesn't want it to change. And so he naturally kind of moves towards that, I think, conservative kind of mindset.
And that's all born from this fear of losing this thing that he had built, and that was so strong.
Yes.
And his his ideologue mind is so rooted, it is so extreme in not wanting to open up or compromise or change that he I guess probably unbeknownst to himself, like became exactly the thing he was running away from. So we've talked about that in the past, and now she's seeing that, right? So she's becoming
disenchanted with him.
Disenchanted with him at this point, and whereas she had been very in love with him, right? So those were the two notes I took from Arcadia that I wanted to touch on. Let's move over to the farmer's market real quick. A couple of really good ones here as far as audio diaries go. So one is called Pulling Together. This is from Andrew Ryan. It says, the children with their very long needles, their tuneless songs, their ghastly errands, their ghoulish Frankenstein fathers. But we've all placed our hand on the great chain of endeavor. My hand is on it, Fontaine's is on it. We all pull it and are pulled by it. Yes, these children are an abomination, but it is not my hand alone on the chain that created them. No, their little fingers were right there next to mine. I like that because again, each one of these audio logs, but particularly for Andrew Ryan, it really does a good job of showing this slow transition from his libertarian mindset to authoritarian mindset. And he's justifying it along the way. So he's talking about how horrible it is, right? Just the sight of these little sisters and the big daddies. And he's like abhorred by what he is seeing. But it's like, it's not just me. This is the great chain we're talking about, right? And Fontaine has been involved, and Tenenbaum and all these other people. It's not just me. And the great chain is the master of all, and it's the one really we're being pulled by that. Again, sort of like the excuse to his God, more or less, right? He's playing the long game here.
In fact, this was mentioned in one of our comments. I think this is a good time to bring it up. There is something that in medieval times was referenced as being called it's called the Great Chain of Being. And I've got the Wikipedia pulled up here. The Great Chain of Being is a hierarchical structure of all matter and life, thought by medieval Christianity to have been decreed by God. The chain begins with God at the top and descends through the angels, humans, animals, and plants down to the minerals. The Great Chain of Being is a concept derived from Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, and Proclus. It was further developed in the Middle Ages. It reached its full expression in early modern Neoplatonism. So if you know anything about Neoplatonism, that's kind of, the idea here, just the natural hierarchy. But the idea of great chain being just like this natural order of things going from the dirt of the material world and the water, going all the way up to God himself, is, it's an old idea.
Interesting. So that's probably where that concept of great chain might have been pulled from or inspired by.
I think so. It must be because I love it too, because on its face, when you play Bioshock, you wouldn't hear much religious talk coming from Andrew Ryan. But if you're aware of what he's saying, and like we picked apart one of his things about, the faith, what is our faith if it's not tested, but he thinks he's being all secular, but it's like, no, he's not. This is another thing where once you know what he's talking about, once you get the reference, you realize just how religious he actually is.
Right. Yeah.
Also, another thing here, you brought up Frank Fontaine, and this is great. Somebody else commented, and I don't know why I missed something as easy as this, but Fontaine means fountain.
Right. Fountainhead,
and is
right.
Probably a reference to the fountainhead. Yeah. Well, that one just, we just totally missed that one.
Yeah. Okay, my next note here is from an audio diary called Adam Explained. I really wanted to read this one because I think in like episode 2, when we're first introduced to the term Adam, I had left it open to explain what Adam is later in the podcast, and then we never actually got around to doing that. So this one is from Bridget Tenenbaum. Adam acts like a benign cancer, destroying native cells and replacing them with unstable stem versions. While this very instability is what gives it its amazing properties, it is also what causes the cosmetic and mental damage. You need more and more atom just to keep back the tide. From a medical standpoint, this is catastrophic. From a business standpoint, well, Fontaine sees the possibilities. So, it explains a little bit there. I'm sure that there's probably more in-depth explanations that can be found, but this does a good job of quickly summarizing how atom is like essentially mutating people, right? It's what's changing their appearance and making them look so messed up, and why they all choose to wear these masks for the most part, the splicers, right? But it's also what gives them their power. So it's like kind of a two-way street, and the more you use it, the more damage is done, the more you have to use to try to like fix the problem. And it's just
a drug.
like
It's a drug.
So I love how at the end of that, from a business standpoint, like the way they look at that, it's you can sell a lot of atom because of the fact that it works like this. So really liked that one. And so Atlas.
That's so funny. That almost sounds like a critique of the pharmaceutical industry. Honestly,
sure, yeah, I agree with that.
Companies like Monsanto that make pharmaceuticals and some of the not so healthy food that we all eat. It's like they kind of play on each other, and they end up selling more of both product.
Right?
It's crazy.
Yep, we had a conversation off camera a little while ago about how capitalism is probably not the best system for health and food
for certain
industries.
It's
right.
Great for lifting people out of poverty. It's great for raising the baseline. It's not so great for everything. We'll just put it that way. Yeah,
there are some areas where it might not be the best idea to incentivize higher and higher profits. Yeah. Okay, so Atlas says, I think soon after this, why do they wear those masks? Maybe there's a part of them that remembers how they used to be and how they used to look, and they're ashamed. So I liked that as like kind of a back-to-back thing there. This next one I have, again from Farmer's Market, is called Hatred. This is from Bridget Chenabom. One of the children came and sat in my lap. I push her off. I shout, "Get away from me." I can see the atom oozing out of the corner of her mouth, thick and green.
That's her right. We didn't. Hair. I referenced this, but I didn't read it. Oh, I forgot.
Right.
How it is.
Right. And I remember that we talked about it, but I love the actual, like the written words here are just so good. I shout, "Get away from me." I can see the atom oozing out of the corner of her mouth, thick and green, her filthy hair hanging in her face, dirty clothes, and that dead glow in her eye. I feel hatred like I never felt before in my chest. Bitter, burning fury. I can barely breathe, and suddenly I know it. It's not this child I hate. It's just really powerful.
That was really powerful. And that was Tenenbaum, right?
Yes, it was.
And this is around the time where she talks about her realizing that
the motherly instinct.
She has emotions and instincts that are not the objective, that don't live up to her philosophy of life, of how she can be secular or not secular. What's the word? She can be detached, from everything she's doing, and that there is no objective morality and all that. And she all of a sudden is just like, I can't help it. I feel like I've done something horribly wrong. I have another quote from her that we'll read towards the end of the game. But she's a great example of a character that kind of counters the Andrew Ryan's philosophy within the game, but in a unique way. It's like she wants to believe with Andrew Ryan. She wants it really bad. But there's something that just keeps her from going there. And she's trying so hard, more than anyone, I think, because she went really far with her experiments. She did some jacked up stuff. And in the end, she's just like, she cannot, it's just unconscionable what she did. And she knows it. And, it's a really good, I feel like it's a really good counter to Andrew Ryan, because it's not just an obvious one, it's more of like a visceral one. It's really good.
Yeah, it's awesome. This next one is from Andrew Ryan. It's called Desperate Times. He says, Dr. Suchong, frankly, I'm shocked by your proposal. If we were to modify the structure of our commercial plasmid line as you propose, to have them make the user vulnerable to mental suggestion through pheromones, would we not be able to effectively control the actions of the citizens of Rapture? Free will is the cornerstone of this city. The thought of sacrificing it is abhorrent. However, we are indeed in a time of war. If Atlas and his bandits have their way, will they not turn us into slaves? And what will become of free will then? Desperate times call for desperate measures. This kind of goes back to a lot of the things we talked about in previous podcasts about fear. If people haven't seen our podcast on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, this is a huge theme for that movie, is that fear is what really drives people to do the abhorrent things that they do. And it's when we become afraid that there's a threat to our way of life, or that we're going to lose something that we care about. That's when we tend to lose a lot of logic in decision making, and we tend to do things that we regret later, or that are abhorrent, like what's happening here. So Andrew Ryan claims to be so dedicated to his ideals, yet as soon as he becomes afraid that his city might be taken by someone else, he is willing to betray them in an instant, because he's afraid quickly. Fontaine will do something way worse than I will with this power. In order to stop him from doing it, I'll use it. You know what I mean? And this is how everyone justifies the horrible things they do that go against their ideals, and they become hypocrites.
All the time. Right? All the time. This is so good. And this stems from the economic idea of scarcity, right? If you really get into it. Because this is why I remember back in the day, I don't know if this is as big a deal anymore, but because of Netflix and all this stuff, but people used to pirate movies and music a lot. And the excuse was, well, if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it anyways, right? Or like overfishing the seas, right? Like there's a lot of countries in specifically, I think, East Asia that are really overfishing the oceans. And their idea is the idea of scarcity, which is, well, if we don't do it, then they will. So we may as well do it and get as much as we can until there's no more fish, right? But the idea of scarcity is what kind of leads people to do that. And I love what Andrew Ryan's doing, because it's the concept of the emergency wartime powers that basically every country has written into their constitution, and what can be described, like how you define the word war or emergency. It's subjective, right? And so at some point, it's like you just kind of start using those wartime powers at times when you probably shouldn't do it. And that's always the excuse given to basically to break things like the Constitution in America, or, your own moral code, right? Is like, oh, but this time it's an emergency. And it's like, yeah, it's always an emergency, huh? It's funny how often that happens.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing how these ideals are what we hold ourselves to, and this is the right way to live, unless there's a threat, and then these ideals don't work. It's just, I don't know. It's amazing to me how easily justifiable that is. But it's all driven from fear. And when people are afraid for their safety and their security, they're willing to give that away.
To lose their power.
Yes.
That's, I think, often what it actually is. That's the
for the leaders, it's the fear of losing power, but for the people, it's a fear of losing their security, right? So they'll give away the rights. They'll allow them to be taken away because it's an emergency. Of course. But so it's like the ideals don't work then. The ideals are not actually what we should live by if you're willing to sacrifice them so readily.
Exactly, because you think of what an ideal is. I think I had brought up in a previous podcast that the ideal, like the highest ideal, should be something akin to a god or something, to something that you're worshiping, something you're giving, you're sacrificing to this ideal because it's so important, right? But as soon as you betray the ideal, what you're actually saying is, no, there's actually something higher than that ideal.
Yes.
And then it's like, well, wait a second, but what is it? And people can't really define it. And what it really is, I'm afraid to lose my way of life. I'm afraid my son's going to get drafted. I'm afraid, whatever it is. But really it turns into something like, maybe to Ayn Rand's point, like a kind of like a selfish fear of like losing yourself. And it's like, I'll do away with the idea. I'll worship whatever you want. I just don't want to die. Right.
Yes.
And that's where it's like, okay, a lot of people would put something above that ideal, which means it's not so much an ideal as it is a convenience, I think.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, I can't help but laugh as I read that, because he just goes over how appalled he is by this entire idea. However, it is wartime. It's just like, dude, you don't believe in this at all.
everything he just said.
Yeah, you don't believe in this at all. You believe in your own power. That's what you're really after here. And
Exactly.
I really loved the way that was written. So glad we could go back and revisit that from Farmer's Market.
Me too. Chocolate Rob's brought up just the voice acting here. By the way, we're interacting with people in our chat via Patreon. For anyone else who feels like they want to get involved. The voice acting is really, really good in these audio diaries. Like they're almost without fail. They're just top quality. Really, really, really good.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, this next one is Functional Children from Bridget Tenenbaum. The children must remain functional to be effective producers of Adam. Again, this cold, detached side of her that she's trying to maintain too, right? And calling them functional children. I had hoped we could place them into vegetative state so they would be more pliable. I find being around them very uncomfortable, even with those things implanted in their bellies, which is the sea slugs, so that they can produce Adam, right? They're still children. They play, they sing. Sometimes they look at me and they don't stop. Sometimes they smile. It just leaves off on that. It's just like it's eating at her, dude. I love the way that's written.
Oh, and to that point, Mix here in the chat, he kind of elaborates on a point I was making a little bit. But Mix says, I think Tenenbaum is a great counter to Andrew Ryan and how she slowly evolves organically out of his philosophy. Not even trying to, right? But she's just so disgusted with herself. The de-radicalization of the ideologue, so to speak. And she is therefore uniquely placed to help the other characters suffering from trauma imposed by Rapture. Reminds me of Solzhenitsyn and what taking responsibility in such a dystopia could and would actually look like. It's something like Dr. Tenenbaum, where she recognizes her part in the whole thing and she does her best to atone, as it were, for the things that she's done.
Right. Last note I have here from the Farmer's Market is an audio diary called First Encounter from Andrew Ryan. On my walk today, I had my first encounter with a pair of them. He, a lumbering palooka in a foul-smelling diving suit, and she, an unwashed moppet in a filthy pink smock. Her pallor was off, green and morbid, and there was a rather unpleasant aspect to her demeanor, as if she were in an altogether different place than the rest of us. I understand the need for such creatures. I just wish they could make them more presentable.
I think I read that, yeah.
Dude. Again,
he's like, I don't care about the evil stuff you're doing. I just hate that they're ugly.
I know, right? And we talked about how ugliness is a sin in Rapture earlier, right?
No excuse not to be beautiful. Yep.
Right. So the sin is not that they've probably irrevocably damaged these little children, either emotionally or mentally, and of course physically, but that they're ugly. They're not beautiful like everyone in Rapture is. They have a duty to be at this point, right? I just found that to be an unbelievable mentality to have after seeing the horror they've inflicted on them. His response to that is ew instead of what have I done?
And see, that's where Tenenbaum and he are different.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so that's all I took for the Farmer's Market. Let's move on to Fort Frolic here. So we didn't talk too much about Anna Culpepper, who was sort of the rival to Sandra Cohen. I read a little bit more about her history, and so she came down, or she was kind of convinced to come down by Ryan, and she actually served kind of on a central council in Rapture for a little while, and Ryan ended up regretting that pretty quickly because she voiced a lot of opposition to a lot of his ideals. And she was causing problems, and eventually she ended up, not being on that council for very much longer. She advocated for things like allowing people in the city to go on short excursions to the surface again, and that was something that Ryan was very against. Like, we can never allow anybody to leave because we can never allow anybody to discover that where Rapture is from the outside world, right? But she was like, no, we can't imprison people in here. We've got to let them leave if they want to for short excursions, make some exceptions, have some regulation around that. Anyway, ideas like that she opposed, and there were, among other things, of course. But she ended up leaving that council, and she was a musician, a lyricist. She ended up writing a lot of songs that were critical of Ryan and of Rapture and of the ideology, and this really, really pissed him off. And she was also very critical of Sandra Cohen, who she basically wrote off as just a mouthpiece. Like his art is all just propaganda mouthpiece for Ryan. He wrote basically the national anthem for Rapture, and it's pretty like on the nose nationalist propaganda, right?
Yeah.
It's not well written. It's like I think there's a character in here who talks about how another one of the artists that was friends and possibly lovers with Cohen for a while, about how like awful it was, like just, you know, anyway. So that's who she was, and why Sandra Cohen and Andrew Ryan in particular wanted her dead. So I wanted to give a little bit of that background, but I'll start off here with a line from Atlas. Ryan's handed the keys to Fort Frolic over to a guy named Sandra Cohen. Cohen's an artist, says some. He's a Section 8, says I. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up, Section 8 is in like Section 8 housing. He's like,
of course.
You know what I mean? Okay. Like he's riffraff, he's poor, he's not like actually all he's built up to be.
He's not cultured.
No. And a lot of people have this opinion of Sander throughout the section. So it turns out that he may not be nearly as good or as talented as an artist as he sort of builds himself up to be. And so he sets out in this chapter, like we talked about, where he sends you to kill people, to put down his doubters, as he calls them. He hates the doubters, and he's gone totally crazy. He's unable to take criticism almost at all. In fact, there was at one point in this where I think it's when you complete the second photograph in his little what is the word I'm looking for? They have a word for it, quadditch, that he's sort of making there.
Oh, quadtitch, yeah, something like that, yeah.
Quadditch. Yeah, when you put the second one in, he asks you if you like it, and then or asks Jack if you like it. You don't do you? And he's like, oh, I hate you, doubters, and blah blah blah. And then he sends a bunch of splicers after you to kill you, right? And so like he's just gonna put anybody who has any criticism of him down. But then after you end up surviving that attack, he's like, you must forgive an artist his, like temperament or whatever. I'm just anxious about finishing this work and let's continue or whatever. So that's kind of the point he's at. And Andrew Ryan was kind of in the same place. And that's kind of the parallel between the characters. They've gotten to this point where they cannot handle anybody saying anything, particularly if it's influential, like Atlas/Fontaine has been, and has actually rallied people of the city to their side in dissent of these ideals, or of, in Sandra Cohen's case, his I guess artistic integrity or his ability. Anyone who dissents to those things, they're at the point where they're ready to just murder them, assassinate them. So there's been several examples of that, and I wanted to read Atlas's because that's how Atlas felt about him. He's an artist, says some. He's Section 8, says I. Okay, so the next audio diary I took down here was Come to the Record Store. This is from Silas Cobb. He's one of the disciples who you kill in this section.
Yeah.
You want to lock us in, old man? Oh, that's fine with Cobbsy. I used to love you. I used to think you were a musical genius. You know why? Because you paid my rent, you ancient hack. So once again, people who, they all kind of agree he's not really that great of an artist, right? I'll show you what I think if you're plinkety plink plink. Wild Bunny, I think we read that one. That's when he wants to take the ears off, right? But we wanted to bring up a comment about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, somebody had mentioned, well, there were a few things. One of them being just to take the ears off, meaning literally, no, it's a bunny mask, but still literally the ears, that he can't stand the criticism. He can't stand listening to this kind of stuff.
Right.
There's another commenter who brought up something that's probably not intended by the artist, but I thought was very interesting. Is the connection between this guy going crazy as an artist and no one understands him, and then Vincent van Gogh, who cut off his own ear and then mailed it to a girl, I think, that he liked. And how there's something like that maybe he equates himself to like that kind of level, right? Like take off the ears kind of thing. I don't know that one was intentional, but it's very interesting nonetheless.
It definitely works. I mean, like,
yes,
in terms of how Van Gogh fell apart mentally, like by the end of his life, right? And that's what's going on with him. And they've referenced like Picasso earlier with Dr. Stein, and so like it would naturally fit.
Yeah. So he's kind of going through that part of his life, the Vince Van Gogh part of artistry.
the Vincent Van Gogh arc. Okay, so we wanted to just comment on that real quick.
Yeah.
This next one is called The Artist's Feud, and this is from Sullivan, who's the head of security for Andrew Ryan. I worked the meatball beat in Little Italy, and even I'm shocked at the cold blood that oozes out of these artistic types. This broad Culpepper, Anna Culpepper, right? Mm-hmm. And that fruit job Cohen are in some kind of feud, and Cohen's looking for my security detail to pick sides. The next thing I know, I'm called into Ryan's office to talk about the whole mess. Nut job artists. So
now, you know what he's referring to there, right? One of the big questions about something like an Ayn Rand society is who deals with law enforcement, who deals with the military and things like that. And the idea is, well, a private company would do it. And then Ken Levine seems to be poking at that a little bit and saying, yeah, well, what happens when there's a squabble between two people and they're both contacting the same private security to handle the problem for each side, you know? And of course, the issue escalates all the way up to Andrew Ryan at that point. But I feel like that's one of the points that Ken Levine was trying to like put an exclamation point there, which is like, hey, some conflict of interest here, possibly.
Well, not only that, but then the fact that it goes to Andrew Ryan, and he's the one who ultimately makes the decision.
I know. It's like, he's the governor, or he's part of the state. I mean, he's got the authority, right?
And he's absurdly furious at her criticism of him. So he's going to pick Cohen's side.
So he's going to... Okay, then that serves to Ken Levine's point then, where it's just like, okay, at some point, the private security just picks a side, and then you're the bad guy.
Yeah, and it's like
course,
if you were...
That's not to say the government does that too. I understand.
Sure,
that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying Ken Levine is critiquing one side. That doesn't mean there isn't a valid critique on the other side as well.
Sure thing. But yeah, it's like, oh, well... You know, it doesn't turn out to be any better, essentially, than the problems of the society they left.
Exactly.
Ultimately,
it's like you're not fixing anything. You're just like creating new problems.
Ultimately, she did not have freedom of speech. She was not allowed to speak badly about Andrew Ryan because he's the one who governs the security. And when they have to pick a side, they're going to pick the side that speaks well about him, that puts him in a good light, that writes the nationalist lyrics for the anthem for him, not the person criticizing his ideals, right?
Yep,
so it's no better than any of the societies they left at all.
Yeah, that's good.
So anyway, good stuff. The next one I took down was Stood Up Again. This is Diane McClintock, so we're returning to her. Stood up again, second time this week, ever since my face was, and she drifts off. Mm-hmm. So Andrew Ryan's not seeing her anymore because she's ugly now, and ugliness is a sin.
Yeah. That's right. That's so good. I love this game. I really do. Ken Levine, he did a great job, and not just him. I always bring him up. I probably should take this time to also recognize there were many other people who made this game, not just him. I doubt that everything, that he signed off on every single decision made in this game, but probably with issues relating to the script. I'll bet you that he at least supervised most of it.
Sure.
That's just really good. I love it.
Yeah. So then she says, Steinman worked on me, but it was never the same since the blast. Being alone so much gives a girl time to think. Would you hate me so much? Who could hate me so much they'd ruin me like this? What did I do to them? I keep thinking of them as bandits and terrorists. Ryan's got locked up in Apollo Square, and I get so mad. Sometimes I can hardly breathe. If I could only confront them, tell them what they did to me, how they're ruining everything for me, for Rapture. Maybe I'd feel better. So she's starting to get this idea that she's going to go talk to some of these dissenters, some of these rebellious types, and try to explain to them how they're ruining everything. And what this is going to lead to, of course, as we've beaten the game, is she's going to end up joining them instead. But this is where she gets the idea to do that. So wanted to throw that in there. This next one is called Musical Insult from Sandra Cohen. Regarding your review of Anna Culpepper's latest musical insult, of all the worthy artists in Rapture, why you continue to devote column inches to this musical gremlin is beyond my imagination. Where she is not derivative, she's boring. Where she's not boring, she's obvious. Where she's not obvious, she's dangerous. So I felt like that last part,
that's
dangerous,
a progression almost.
yes.
Yeah.
That last part, dangerous, plays into the fear. So we've been talking about fear driving people to abandon their ideals and all that. We had that conversation earlier. But like, she's dangerous to my what's the word I'm looking for? Reputation as an artist, to my ability to make a living at doing this in the city. She's ruining me as an artist. She's dangerous to that. So what action will I take to not lose what I'm afraid of losing, right? That the fear is beginning to build in him. The fear is really beginning to build in Ryan. And now they're going to be working to get, well, Cohen is going to be used by Ryan, but Ryan will get what he wants out of the deal, which is Culpepper dead. But basically acting on their fears. So let's see here. Next one I took down was Requiem for Andrew Ryan. This is also Sandra Cohen. I could have been the toast of Broadway, the talk of Hollywood, but instead I followed you to this soggy bucket. When you needed my starlight, I illuminated you, but now I rot, waiting for an audience that doesn't ever come. I'm writing something for you, Andrew Ryan. It's a requiem. So now he's turning on him because, of course, Ryan just used him all along. So we're seeing kind of, I think we missed some of these
selfish motivations. Yeah.
Yeah, we missed some of this sort of key degradation as we were discussing it before. So I wanted to throw these back in again.
Very nice.
The Doubters. This one's good. Sandra Cohen again. Rapture is going to hell. And why? Because of them. Always behind the scenes, at the Lyceum, at the galleries in Soho, even down here in this so-called utopia. The Doubters. But Ryan understands. Yes, there's blood in the streets. Yes, people sometimes disappear. And those awful little girls. Well, I suppose the Doubters think you can paint a picture without soiling your smock. That last line is so good. I suppose the Doubters think you can paint paint a picture without soiling your smock. There's something very similar to what Ryan said earlier, right?
Well, I can't remember what he said. The one that I've always thought of is you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. I feel like it's a similar statement, right?
Right. Again, a justification for all the awful things you're going to do and the betrayal of ideals. Ends justify the means. It's consequentialism, right? Yeah, we talked about that a lot in our Final Fantasy Tactics analysis. Again, extremist ideology leads you into that frame of mind. Not to say that frame of mind is never correct. I'm not trying to say consequentialism is always wrong, or there's never a case where the ends justify the means. But what I'm saying is that extremist ideology gets you there quicker than maybe you should, where you're willing to justify any ends or any means to get to an ends, and you end up doing some things that are like what these people are doing.
It almost happens
long before they're necessary.
Yeah, when you're just too sure of yourself.
Yes,
it's just like when this type of stuff happens.
Right.
Chocolate Rob put a note up here. He says the musical insult that was referred to is seen on a poster outside of Rapture Records. She wrote a song called Ryan's Songbird with a picture of Cohen on it.
Yeah, it was like a caricature of him. So like making fun of him, right?
There you go.
And this is something that I didn't get to see because I killed Sandra Cohen. But if you leave Sandra Cohen alive in, I think it's Apollo Square or maybe Olympus Heights, one of the areas there towards the end of the game, you can go into Sandra Cohen's apartment and you'll see these posters kind of piled up in his room that he tore down, right? And I think it's mentioned that he threw darts at them or something like that.
Atlas was.
Well, that was Atlas. So, okay, different,
that was Atlas.
Different thing. Anyways, point being that I didn't see this part of the game because I killed Cohen. So if you don't kill him, you'll see these posters that he tore down up in his apartment. And anyway, so that was a part of the game I missed out on because I wanted to kill him so badly.
Did the ends justify the means?
Probably not. Probably didn't, but I was just pissed I didn't get to team up with the dudes and get them out of the situation. Yeah. I'm going to skip over this one. This is Iceman Cometh. It's just the other guy, Finnegan. He's one of the other disciples, and he's like, basically he puts together this little splicer cocktail, and he's ready to like fight. It's more or less that's the idea. It's not too important. But this one is Fontaine's Army. This comes from Bill McDonough. McDonough. I never know how to pronounce that. Fontaine knew our blokes were coming. We were done over. Them splicers come screaming out the woodwork, burping fire, spitting ice. Demons out of the Bible they were. Never seen nothing like it. It wasn't a business he was building. It was an army. So I wanted to throw this in there, not necessarily to play devil's advocate to what we've been talking about so far with fear leading people to do reprehensible things, but to give some validity to the fact that it's part of human nature to do this. As much as it's easy from our end to kind of like condemn Andrew Ryan for being a hypocrite and betraying his ideals so fast, it might be a little bit easier than we're giving it credit for when you see splicers burping fire coming at your security detail and going, holy crap, what is happening? Yeah. We had no idea what Fontaine was really up to.
Yep. Or like the Houdini splicers like disappearing and stuff, and it's like, this is straight out of like mythology. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to what we had talked about in an earlier episode about sort of the metaphor for maybe something like the internet or nuclear weapons or some unforeseen element being so throwing the balance of power off to such a degree that you don't know how to handle it with the current set of ideals you have. And so then what do you turn to when your current ideals don't work anymore? And I think natural inclination is that authoritarian emergency powers sort of place, right? Where like that's the real ideals we hold that we pretend like we don't as human beings, right? We want to think we're higher than that. We want to think we're better than that. We want to think, no, that's not the way to live. The way to live is A, B, or C ideology that aspires to be higher than that. However, have we faced splicers before? and what would we really do in that situation?
Dude, I don't freaking know, man. I have no clue.
Right? And so like we haven't faced the power of that big social media platforms have before. We haven't we hadn't faced two nations having thousands of nuclear weapons like this before. So what do we do? Like, what do we really do? And the default seems to be we go back to this almost primal mindset of emergency powers and authoritarianism. But so I guess what I wanted to do was throw this out there to not put myself on a high horse so much and admit that like I'm human as well. And yes, when things are scary, it's very easy to go there. It's very easy to criticize Andrew Ryan for giving up his ideals so easily, but it's not really so easily when you see what Bill McDonough is explaining here. Yeah. So
it was quite something.
Yeah. Okay. This next one is called Guns Blazing. Or no, wait. Bump Culpepper. This one's from Sullivan. So he just got the order to kill her, basically, from Andrew Ryan. I just got the word to put the bump on Anna Culpepper. This isn't some gangster or hard-nosed political operative. We're talking about a dizzy twist, what wrote a song or two that got under Ryan's wig. Like, that's the level we're at here. He's so afraid, he's so messed up that somebody just criticizing him, writing a nasty song about him from his perspective is worth killing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where Sullivan is really becoming disenchanted with Ryan as well, right? And we see that a little bit more later where actually I think we already talked about it where he sent in his resignation and everything. Like he's just like, I'm not all about this anymore. This is no longer what it's supposed to be. Yeah. I would kill Andrew Ryan, a man that I loved because I love Rapture more. He loved the ideals more than he loved the man who taught him the ideals. So Sullivan, in the midst of all of this, when he had to make a choice between betraying his ideals, in the end, he chose not to.
So the ideals were actually higher.
For him. For him, they were. Yeah. But who knows? I mean, obviously, a lot of people didn't survive. So You die for the ideals and say the ideals are better, or you resort to, like we've been saying, the emergency powers to try to survive. What's stronger, the will to survive or the will to die for your ideals? Okay, this one comes from Bill McDonough again, guns blazing. The good people of Rapture didn't sign up to see us government types shutting down shops, killing their owners, even with a ponce like Fontaine. But he bring it on himself. Instead of copying it on the chin, Bugger gets into his head that he's going to go down guns blazing. Who does he think he is? John Bloody Wayne? We can get on top of this. We can. Here's what we do. We find Fontaine's will and make what was his go to where it was intended, and not into the pockets of us that put him into the ground. So Bill McDonough was also, doing a little bit of this ends justify the means thing. He believed they had to kill Fontaine. Like, we can't leave him alive and allow Rapture to survive on the ideas we built it on. But what we can't do is take his companies, is take all of this stuff and give it to the state, nationalize it. We can't give it to Ryan. If we do that, then we've betrayed the ideals way beyond what Bill McDonough is willing to do. And at that point, that's a step too far. We've got to give it to the poor that Fontaine claimed to be fighting for, because he set up like a poorhouse and everything like that. So he was like, okay, we can fix this, but we got to find the will, or make one, and make sure that goes to the people it's intended to go to, or that he pretended they were intended to go to, and make sure we don't take it for ourselves, or else it's a disaster.
That's so funny. It seems like Rapture created a system where it's just almost impossible to actually altruistically do the right thing. You have to cheat and fake things in order to, in order to do what you see as the right thing, something like that. In order to act unselfishly, you have to kind of cheat and fake things.
And how often has that happened in even just in American history, right? Where the FBI or whatever will lie to the people to sort of like build a facade of the American ideals, that they're being upheld, that the things we believe in are really what this country's built on, when really what we're doing is just as bad as what they claim to hate communists for, right? So
a lot of the experiments and a lot of the government stuff. And what's funny is they can always claim that, but we're not doing that anymore, because we never really know. There's like a 20 or 30 year lag behind what they're actually doing and when it gets revealed. And then people are like, oh, that's crazy, I can't believe they did that. But then it's like, oh, that was 20 years ago though. We're definitely not doing that anymore. And then 20 years later, we find out what they're doing. They're always doing something.
Yep. And again, this is not to, I hope people really are not taking some of what we're saying here as like some kind of political statement, a strong political statement. As much as it is just, most ideologies cannot really uphold when the rubber meets the road. And that's really what the point of this game is that
especially when there's so much power at stake. There's especially in American politics and American government, it's like you're dealing with trillions of dollars. I mean, it's almost inevitably going to go into some really bad places.
Right. And we would be equally critical of communist authoritarianism as we are of Andrew Ryan, or of what our own government has done.
Our own country,
Right. It's just the fact that the ideals seem to crumble when there's fear of either losing power or of national security. Like the ideals we claim to have, they get abandoned in the face of those fears. And so that's what this game is really saying. It's not here to criticize capitalism necessarily, or to say the other ideological extreme is what we should be doing. It's the total opposite of that. It's saying that ideals are really nice on paper, and it's a lot harder to uphold them when the internet comes around, or when nuclear weapons come around, or whatever it might be. Like when something like that happens, we tend to, like I've been saying and repeating myself at this point, abandon the ideals. And that's what the criticism is really about here. Okay, so this one's It's All Grift from Hector Rodriguez. You know what? Art, music, poetry, it's all grift. Cohen's got Ryan wrapped around his little pinky. And why? Because he tells him what he wants to hear. Rise, Rapture, Rise, which is the name of the anthem, right? Nuts. That stuff was stale before it came out of Cohen's pen. I'm through with the whole pinata. Let's see that old fruit try and keep me here. So he's another one of the guys that you're sent to kill, one of the former disciples of Cohen. So again, another person calling him out for not being that great of a lyricist for sure, but artist generally. Okay, just a couple more things here, and we'll be done with Fort Frolic. Ryan's stable boy. This is from Anna Culpepper. Cohen's not a musician. He's Ryan's stable boy. Ryan's corrupt policies crap all over the place, and Cohen flutters around clearing it up. But instead of using a shovel, like you would with a proper mule, Cohen titties with a catchy melody and a clever turn of phrase. But no matter how nicely it sounds, he can't really do anything about the smell. I freaking love that last line. It's so... There's a really nice, clever turn of phrase there, right? We talked about this with how much we loved the dialogue in Vagrant Story. The ability to use metaphor to kind of like wittily like come back at another character back and forth, right? The term for that is called a conceit, right? So conceits back and forth. These clever turn of phrases that use metaphors to like make a point. This reads very much like that. So she makes this metaphor to Cohen being this stable boy going around clearing up the manure from the mule Andrew Ryan, who is just crapping out all these horrible policies everywhere. And he comes up to scoop it up and make it, clean it up and make it sound nice. But no matter how nicely it sounds, he can't really do anything about the smell. So all of this smells a lot like propaganda. And it's obvious, it's on the nose, it smells terrible. No matter what it sounds like, right? It smells awful, it smells fishy, right? I loved that turn of phrase. I thought it was great.
Very good.
Last one here. This is just Sander Cohen. Actually, I don't need to read this. This is just basically, if you don't kill him, he sends you off to go kill Ryan and all that. So we kind of talked about that last time. Okay, I only have a few, just I think 3 notes on Hephaestus that were extra from what we hadn't said.
I have just one more note for Fort Frolic, something we didn't bring up. There was that play about Patrick and Moira.
Yes.
That they mention it in an audio diary, and then you see a poster for it, I think. And it just, I got the Moira connection, like, oh, that means fate, and it's what Atlas said his wife's name was. Oh, that's weird. But I forgot that Atlas also said he had a son named Patrick.
Yep.
And this play is called Patrick and Moira. And so all of a sudden I'm thinking, what are the odds, right? What are the odds that Atlas's family happen to be the names of people in this popular play in Fort Frolic in Rapture? So that's a thing we're going to get into soon.
Yeah, there's a really great quote from him later about his family, quote unquote.
Yeah,
right?
he's such a dirt person.
He's awful.
He's so bad.
But we'll get to that in a minute. It's really good though. So first note I took from Hephaestus was something Andrew Ryan says to you really soon after you leave there, and like communication is established again because Cohen had jammed that, right? So Ryan says, I see Cohen's lost his touch. If you knew him when, and he sort of trails off, when he used to believe in the work, in the struggle, and now he rots in that Neverland waiting for someone to come and tell him he's still got it. I suppose that's why he let you live. And I kind of realized with that is, I think, why he let Jack live, aside from wanting revenge on Ryan to go, he said something like, you have your own canvas, and he realized you're there to kill Ryan. But additionally, I think he is looking for someone because he asked us, what do you think? And when there was, you don't like it? He like freaked out. He like lost it completely. So I really liked that. I think it's pretty like, astute from Ryan, like that Cohen actually let us leave and live because he's hoping that we'll tell him he still got it. Okay, this one is called Ryan Takes Fontaine Futuristics. It's from Bill McDonough. I think we read this last time, but I'm going to read it again because it's really good. Ryan nationalized Fontaine Futuristics. So this was exactly what Fontaine in the last area, Fort Frolic, said they can't do. They cannot take Fontaine's assets. They have to give it to the people he claimed in his will he was going to give it to. They have to give it to the poor, or else it's going to be a disaster, right? And that's exactly what Ryan does. First thing he does is he nationalizes Fontaine's company. He owns it now, lock, stock, and barrel. For the good of the city, he says. He'll break it up in due time, he says. I've resigned from the council and lodged me letter of protest, but that's just pissing in the wind. It'll be war, I say, unless somebody stops Ryan and right fast. So this is when Bill McDonough turns on Ryan, is when he took that extra step. Okay, we killed him. I'm willing to go that far. We cannot take his stuff. That's too far in betraying the ideals. So even Bill McDonough was not willing to go that far. So both Sullivan and McDonough, who were like two of his most loyal security detail, they couldn't stick with it. Ryan went way too far for those guys.
Yeah.
It shows you, as extreme as these guys probably were in their ideology, just how far Ryan fell from his original ideals, right? How far away he got from it. All right, the next one is Assassin from Anya Andertsdotter.
Yes, which sounds like Ayn Rand's daughter.
Yeah, it kind of does.
Great.
Says, an assassin, that's rich. I could have gone along, I suppose, spliced up, forgot. I believed in this place. I believed in Ryan. But when it got hard, Ryan didn't believe in rapture, didn't believe in the great chain. He believed in power. And now this place is busto, and my girl is gone, worse than gone, one of those things. So am I an assassin? Well, only one way to find out. So somebody who had their daughter turned into one of the little sisters, right? Also, basically admitting how Ryan never really believed in his ideals to begin with. And that's how you find out whether you do believe in what you really believe in. When the rubber meets the road and you, as a metaphor, you see the splicers burping fire coming at you.
Yeah.
That's when you find out what you really believe in. Right?
Absolutely. That's part of, we brought this up, I think it was in Mass Effect, where they say there are no atheists in a foxhole, something like that.
Yes, right.
Like when the bullets are flying over your head, that's where who you really are and what you really believe comes out.
Right.
And it's usually not the things you're talking about when the bullets aren't flying.
Exactly. It's a lot easier to talk about ideals when you're living in a time of peace and security and safety. It's much harder to do that when you actually have the real chance of losing your own life or the lives of the people you love, your daughters, your sons, your wives and husbands. A lot different. You start thinking a lot differently when you're actually facing that. And I think everybody should think about this from time to time. That's what's important. I think what this game is getting at is not so much, let's take Ayn Rand's philosophy or whoever's and just like tear it apart. I don't think that that's the point, which is why some people's criticism of, let's say, Ken Levine having a very basic understanding of Ayn Rand's philosophy, for instance, right? Or saying, this is like a teenager's level of understanding, I saw one person say. I'm not here to argue with that. You probably are right, but but my point is that's not the point of the game. Like the point of the game is not to take a crap on Ayn Rand. The point of the game is to say ideals are great when you're not facing the bullets, when you're not actually in real danger of losing what's important to you, and the fear that comes during that, and how easy it is to talk about ideals and how you can get so married to those ideals that you're totally rigid in your thinking. You're unwilling to compromise at all, and you will not be open to listening to other perspectives. When you become completely radicalized to those ideals and unable to be open to other perspectives, you lose sight of what is true. And Ryan has a line we're going to read here a little bit later where he asks himself this question and ultimately is completely unable to go there. He cannot in the end admit that he made mistakes and that he was wrong
Yeah.
in his ideals, that his ideals were not perfect the way that he thought they were. And I think it is vital, absolutely vital for every person to check themselves and what they believe, whether you are, let's say, on an extreme sort of end of ideology or not. Because I don't consider myself to be. I consider myself to be pretty neutral in terms of my leanings politically and whatnot.
But in a different time,
yeah,
you'd be absolutely radical. Or
for sure.
Honestly, what is neutral and what is extreme is also kind of relative.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And even if it is truly neutral or center or whatever you want to call it, or balanced, even if it was perfectly balanced, which there's no such thing as perfectly balanced. Let's say it was. You still need to check yourself. You still need to not get so convinced you are right about everything, because it's so easy to believe you are, because it's your own perspective. We're all trapped in this little prism of our own brain with only our own perspective to guide us through life. And so it just seems natural to accept that's real, because that's the prism through which we see reality. But we are wrong so much more often than we think we are. Way more often than we think we are. And we've got to be able.
The experts as well are
absolutely
wrong more often than we would like to admit, because we want to rely on people we think know stuff. And when they don't, it kind of throws everything out of whack. But
absolutely. Yeah. And so the point of the game is not, like I say, to take a dump on this ideology, because in the next game they just go for the other extreme on the other pole, and they do it to that, and then they come over here to nationalist fascism with Infinite. So like the point is not to pick an ideology to disparage. The point is to say, are you too convinced you're right? Check yourself, because you probably are, because everybody is, right? That's what the game is really getting at. So I would just want to make that point. Like, that's what we're really talking about here. We're not trying to say Ayn Rand sucks, even if you do believe that. That's not the point of the game, right? Okay.
Chocolate Rob says, poor Anya ends up pinned to the Andrew Ryan's wall along with McDonough. Neither of them succeeded in the end. In
the assassination attempt, yeah.
Yeah.
Only Jack. Well, even Jack. According to Ryan, Jack wouldn't have been successful. He took his own life, right?
Exactly. Oh, that guy. He's too clever. Too clever. But obviously they didn't succeed in killing Andrew Ryan. It's just that they're dead. They're not even still around doing anything. They're gone.
Right. Okay, so now I'm moving on here to Olympus Heights, which is where we left off from last time. So now we've actually caught back up to where we were in the playthrough. So this is after Andrew Ryan's death, after Atlas reveals himself as Fontaine, and basically you learn about the whole programming that had been done with the trigger words, would you kindly, and all that. So we wake up in Olympus Heights in where the Little Sisters kind of live with Tenenbaum. And so this is what Tenenbaum says to you as you wake up. Welcome back, child. Welcome to the city where you were born. You're angry at Fontaine, yes? Now you know the truth. You are his tool, brought back to Rapture to save him. You have saved many of my little ones. Of course, this would be probably a little different had you not done that. I owe you a debt. While you sleep, I undid some of Fontaine's mental conditioning. His control is no longer complete, but he can still pull some very unpleasant strings. We made your mind with many locks and keys. So remember, Tenenbaum was involved with Fontaine's programming of Jack too. So not only does she feel awful about what she did to the Little Sisters, she probably feels really bad about what she did to us. And this is kind of the bond they've created between the Little Sisters and Jack in terms of the shared trauma they have had at the hands of Fontaine and Tenenbaum. So she's trying to undo that, not only, or make up for it in some way, whatever way she's capable with the Little Sisters, but also for us. And that's what she's going to do. She's going to help us break Fontaine's control. Fontaine has most of those keys, but not all. Su Chong designed your mind, taught Fontaine to control you. You might find answers in Su Chong's flat in Mercury Suites. So that's where she sends you off to try to find a way to break the remainder of Fontaine's control over you. But she did at least take away his ability to use the phrase, would you kindly, and make you do things.
Yep.
So that's
And
the
he
thing.
does. He tries to use it again later, and it doesn't
Yeah.
work. And he's like, "Would you kindly?" He like keeps doing it over and over. And when
Right.
he finally realizes it won't work, he has another phrase that he also beat into us
Mm-hmm.
that apparently works to stop the heart from beating, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. He
Yep.
says the phrase, and I can't remember what it is.
Code yellow.
Code yellow, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden you start getting these like your heart starts skipping a beat, you know, and you start getting all woozy.
Yep.
But he says, "Oh, it'll take a while for your heart to actually stop, but you know,
Yep.
it's the damage is done, right?"
Right. It sort of creates a ticking clock situation, not technically, like there's not like a real time limit gameplay wise, but in the
It
story,
feels like
it's,
there is though. It feels like
yes.
there is in the game because each time it happens, it's like, oh no, I gotta. It keeps you urgent.
Yeah, because it's taking away your maximum HP. So, like, if you had been doing upgrades through Atom with the little sisters, when you save them and you get Atom, you can go to those. I don't know what they call it. The little. What is it? The vending machine thing where you spend
The
the
circus
Atom.
of value.
Not that one. The one for the little sisters. But anyways, you spend the points there and you can get new powers or you can increase your health, right? So if you've been doing that, every time this happens, it's taking your maximum health down. So it's like you have a lower and lower health bar each time. And so, you know, the idea is like you're going to die if you don't hurry up and get this like cure to whatever he's done for the other key that Tenenbaum does not have to Jack's mind, but that Fontaine does have, the code yellow trigger. So, but
Called the Gatherer's Garden, by the way.
Gatherer's Garden?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what the name of the vending machine is. Okay.
Yeah.
So I took a couple lines down here. They're all from Frank Fontaine, and each time this happens, where you go, ugh, and you're like the maximum health goes down, he talks about how hard it is on him to watch you go through this, right? He says, "That's it, kid. You're busto. My new friends will catch up with you soon. Oh, kid, I hope they make it quick." You know, like he's saying, I hope they can make it painless and kill you fast. You know, he doesn't want to see you suffer. Then he says later, "I don't like this any more than you do, kid, but you got to understand where I'm coming from. I've got 12 years down here. Big investment. Man can't walk away from a long can like that." And then he says later, "Kills me to turn my fist on you. But business is business. Don't let it get you down. Won't make a difference when this whole place is fish food." And then I just took one more down, but I think there's a couple others. He says, "Hate to see you this way, kid. Hell, I was there when you were born. You ever have a dog you got to put down? Breaks your heart." So there's two.
That's so bad.
There's two sides of this that are bad.
Yes.
First of all,
Gosh.
equating Jack, who he's almost talking about like a son here earlier, but then actually turning that into more like a pet. You were like a pet to me, like a pet dog. The dehumanization of that. But on top of that, yes, Jack did have a dog he had to put down. He was forced to put it down by Su Chong, who used the "would you kindly" trigger to make him break the dog's neck. And it's like, dude, so Jack, such a Jack thing to say. And it makes me wonder whether or not it was intentional. He said that as a means to dehumanize him.
With us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like he's not just saying it, well, have you ever had an animal you had to put down? He knew Jack did that, and he knew how much it hurt him. And so he's equating what Jack did to that dog to what he has to do with him. Like the dehumanization of that.
It's a dog. Yes. So Jack is a dog that is disobeying, and now he has to kill his pet, his dog that did his bidding. And it's also talking down about who he was this whole time. Just saying that, like, yeah, you've just been you've been a dog this whole time following orders.
Yeah.
That's I don't know. Yeah. It's a put down.
It's horrible. Frank Fontaine sucks.
He's awful, dude. He's so bad.
Okay. Here's a journal I took down from. It's called Artist Woman from Sullivan, I think the head of security again. "When it was done with Culpepper, I left her as she was in the bathroom. I seen she had a blanket half knitted by her bed. It was nice, black and red, real pretty. So I took it so I could, have somebody finish it, so it could be of use to someone. It just didn't seem right to leave it lying there all by itself." So you see how much it's eating at him that he betrayed his ideals at this point.
Yeah.
Because he talked about how we're not talking about some mobster here or some, like hardcore criminal. This is just a person who wrote a song. And it pissed off Ryan. And he's sending me to assassinate this woman. And he did it. He actually went through with it. And he sees the half-knitted blanket. And he has to take it with him. He can't just leave that behind. I loved that.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
That was a good touch. I like that.
So we got another line from Frank Fontaine. That Tenenbaum ain't what you think. Florence Nightingale, huh? That'll all come crashing down for you, say, canned tomatoes. I've seen good bucko. I've seen great bucko. But when you waltz through Rapture and World War II without even a scratch, you got more than leprechauns watching over you. So he's talking about Tenenbaum there, that she survived World War II, right? Because she was in the concentration camps.
The camps,
right?
yeah.
And she survived through this war in Rapture. Like, obviously, there's something more going on here, right? Like, you've been betrayed by me. And he'll say this later, you've had betrayal. You really trust this woman? Now, we know from the audio logs that she has actually repented at this point, right? So she's really trying to make it up. But I like how this sows doubt, because it almost does set it up to feel like, wait a minute, what if she's playing us too? Everyone down here is playing everyone else. It creates some real doubt there where you're like, maybe I shouldn't be trusting her. Like, maybe she is going to turn on me. Of course, that doesn't end up happening. We're winding down to the end of the game. But I liked that because it was... It's totally plausible that could be happening too. At this point.
That could have been a way that this game went. Absolutely.
Yeah, I loved that. The last one I took down from here was Sad Saps from Frank Fontaine. These sad saps, they come to Rapture thinking they're going to be captains of industry, but they all forget that somebody's got to scrub the toilets. What an angle they gave me. I had these mugs, a cot, and a bowl of soup, or I hand them, right? A cot and a bowl of soup, and they give me their lives. Who needs an army when I got Fontaine's Home for the Poor? So, this is, I think, kind of a common thing you hear about capitalism, right? For people who criticize it, is that, we talk about the opportunity for, starting your own business and creating your own product and going out there. But it's like the society, there's got to be somebody around scrubbing toilets for the society to work. Like, it's at every level, there needs to be somebody doing this. There have to be people who do not become captains in industry and who are lower on the totem pole or the hierarchy of the society for it to work. And
it's not even that there have to be people, it's that there has to be the majority of people who are not, higher up.
Yeah, in order for the captains of industry to go out there and create this abundance for themselves and become rich and live that sort of lifestyle that they dreamed about, it requires that tons of people willingly take jobs where they're never going to have that, and where they're essentially going to work give their labor and their lives away to make that possible for someone else. And I'm not, again, I'm not here making some sort of statement about whether or not this is a good or a bad thing necessarily, as much as I am pointing out, again, in every ideology, there are things you got to deal with like this, that you have to face. You have to face these realities that it's not perfect. And are there ways that we can improve this, or are there ways that we can create something better, right?
Right, because somebody has to do it either way. I think the capitalist thing is the voluntary, right? That it's like somebody has to do it, but if nobody wants to do it, then the price that people are willing to pay for someone to do it just slowly starts going up until eventually people say, oh, I'll do it for that amount, And as long as people aren't being forced to do all those dirty jobs,
right,
eventually somebody does get to do them. The trouble is, you question whether that's the American dream or not. But
sure,
people would rather not starve, I suppose.
I love the line. I think it was from, oh my goodness, who's the comedian? He was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Oh my gosh, I can't think of his name right now. Someone in the comments, please. Someone in Discord, help me out.
Was he Rufus? Who are you talking
Yes,
about?
the old guy who like guides them.
Rufus.
He's a comedian.
Oh no,
What's his
not,
freaking name?
The famous guy, George Carlin.
George Carlin. Thank you so much.
Yes,
I loved
Rufus.
this line by George Carlin where he says, "You got to be the American dream. It's called the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it." I freaking loved that. I thought it was super clever. Okay. So let's move to Apollo Square here. Oh, at the end of this, before you get to Apollo Square, you find what's called Lot 192. And you take it, and it breaks, or it begins to break the code yellow sort of like control that Fontaine has over you. But it has other side effects where you can't choose your powers anymore. Like for a limited time, like they keep switching randomly, so you can't choose which of your powers that you use, and so they become kind of useless at that point, right?
Oh yeah.
And you got to get like a bigger dose in order to like fully break it and then have control again. So you got to go to Apollo Square in order to get a higher dose of the medication that will actually like free you from Fontaine. So that's kind of like the gameplay constraint that you're working under now. And it's kind of cool. It breaks it up quite a bit, where like if you were dependent on using abilities to fight earlier, which it kind of pushed me to because I lost all my ammo back in Fort Frolic. Right. Now I can't use the powers and I've got to depend on the ammo. So anyway, I liked it. I thought it was a nice sort of like break or a little wrench kind of thrown into the gameplay loop that made it a little more interesting for this next section. Okay, so the first note I took in Apollo Square was the audio log, "What's Happening Here?" from Diane McClintock. "I was so angry when I came down here, but my God, I had no idea. There's armed men all over the place. I saw a woman climb over the fence trying to escape. One of Ryan's guards pointed at her, and she lit on fire just like that. What's happening here?" So she was coming down here to give these Atlas followers a piece of her mind, right? Don't you guys realize how much you're ruining Rapture? And how could you do this to me? How could you come in on New Year's Eve and shoot me like this and disfigure me and cause me all this pain? And she goes down there and she sees Ryan's men lighting a woman on fire who's trying to run away. And she goes, this was not what I was expecting to find here.
Yeah.
And this is when her mind starts to change about who she should, ally herself with. So pretty powerful stuff. I'm sure there are many current day examples or that you could use this as a metaphor for, where you see something in the news that makes you go, wait a minute, like this is not what I thought this country was all about, right? Okay, so Atlas Lives is the next one, also from Diane McClintock. "I bribed one of the gorillas at the gate to let me in. It's awful in here. To my right, I can see a dead woman lying in the street. Everybody's just walking by her like she isn't there. But I noticed something spray painted everywhere. Atlas Lives. I don't know what it means, but something tells me it's important to these people." So this is after Frank Fontaine has died. He allowed them to think he was dead. And now he's taken up the Atlas moniker, and he's rallying people through that.
He's John Galt, yeah.
Exactly.
That's great.
Okay, so this is when... Did you end up going into Fontaine's house for the poor? Because I think it's kind of like an area you don't necessarily have to go into. It's almost optional. But there's a lot of good stuff in here.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so I took down this line from Frank Fontaine. Made Ryan good and mad when I started playing the charity angle. Fontaine's home for the poor. Before I knew it, I was calling myself Atlas and leading an army. Ryan and his precious Rapture. You don't have to build a city to make people worship you. Just make the chumps believe they're worth a nickel. So, there was a point I kind of wanted to make with this. Atlas is sort of taking on the opposite political ideology in terms of what he's preaching, but of course he doesn't really believe in it, and he's just using that to get his army. So, there's also that you got to watch out for in terms of ideologues you follow. What is it that they're really after? How do they really live? Do they live what they're preaching? Is somebody who's preaching the things that, say, Atlas would have been preaching, is that really the way this person lives, or are they just using it to gain your subscription to their YouTube channel or whatever it might be to gain power, to use you and those following what this person is saying, the ideals that you believe in? Do they really believe in it or not? That's another thing you really got to watch out for, right? Is who you're listening to. And as far as I'm concerned, in terms of like political discourse in this country, there's not too many people I trust that really believe what they're saying, particularly when they're making a lot of money by saying it. And this is on all sides of the political spectrum, to be honest. Okay, this one is from called Protection Bond from Yi Suchong. I loved this just because Suchong finally gets what's coming to him. So he says, clinical trial, protector system plasmid lot 255. Dr. Suchong, client Ryan Industries. Very frustrating day. I can't seem to get the damn big daddies to imprint on the little brats. The protection bond is not forming.
Okay, especially because of where you find this as well.
Yes, right.
It's next to a person who's just become very jacked.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody who died a horrible, horrible death. Okay, keep reading.
And so as he's, making this audio log, we get a little sister who speaks up saying, Papa Suchong. And he says, get away. Maybe if I modify the genetic sequence to, and she says, Papa Suchong. He says, shush, shoo. Sequence allow for Papa Suchong, Papa Suchong, Papa Suchong. And he goes, get away, you filthy little shit. And he like smacks her. And as he hits her and she starts crying, he goes, what? And then we hear a bouncer roar. Bouncer's one of the types of Big Daddies. So there's like different classes of them, right?
Yeah.
And he goes, what are you doing? Get back, get back. Ah! So the sweet irony here. He cannot seem to figure out how to get these big daddies and little sisters to bond. And it was by smacking this girl and mistreating her the way they have been that it finally, the breakthrough happened.
And it kills him. Oh, that was so good.
Yep. I loved it. Loved it. Okay. The next one is Meeting Atlas. This is from Diane McClintock as well. This is where it really kind of starts to come around for her. There's another one after this, but I really like this one too. She says, the people here have grown to trust me, Ryan's mistress, and still they take me in. They finally brought me to Atlas. Without him, the people of Apollo Square would give up. I asked him if he was going to lead the people in some kind of uprising against Ryan. He sighed and said, I'm not a liberator. Liberators do not exist. These people will liberate themselves. I thought Andrew Ryan was a great man. I was a fool. So, in terms of what I was just talking about a minute ago, right, with be careful who you're listening to or the ideologue that you're following and getting your information from and your ideals from, because they may act like this when they're live streaming or talking to you on TV. They may say things like this, but they're playing you. They're playing you, and they're getting something from it, especially those that make a lot of money to talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah, you see that a lot.
So they may be very convincing in their act as Atlas is being here, but we all know Atlas is not really Atlas. Atlas is Frank Fontaine, and Frank Fontaine sucks. He's horrible. So you got to be careful with that, man. You got to be careful for that. You got to think for yourself more. Don't put so much of your the formation of your ideals into somebody in a position of power like that. It's just not saying that there's no such thing as a paragon in a position like that, but it's not exactly common. They're very much more often driven by power and money, and when they have a lot of it and they have a lot of it to lose, they'll say what they need to say, and that's exactly what Fontaine is doing here. And McClintock is taking it, just hook, line, and sinker at this point. Okay, the next one I have here is The Longest Con. Frank Fontaine, never play a man for the short con when you can play him for the long one. Atlas is the longest con of all. Playing into what I was just saying. Ryan wanted Frank Fontaine dead. I just gave him what he wanted. As Atlas, I got a new face, a clean record, and a fresh start. Now it's time to take back Rapture. And then as he's saying that, Diane McClintock comes in. I can't wait to tell Atlas. He'll be so pleased. And then he changes his voice from the Frank Fontaine like mobster New Yorker accent into his Atlas accent, right? Miss McClintock, what are you doing here? Let me just... And he slowly kind of stammers off. So, again, just kind of the same thing of what I was just saying. And then last one here from Diane McClintock. Today's raid. In fact, she was actually saying this. She was recording this one as she walked in on Frank Fontaine there. So that line there where she says, he'll be so pleased, just pay attention to the end of this one. We went on a raid outside the wire today. We snagged 31 rounds of buckshot, 4 frag grenades, a shotgun, and 34 Atom. We lost McGee, Epstein, and Valette. We got one of those goddamn big daddies in the bargain, though. It was something awful what they had to do to that little girl to get the Atom. But we didn't start this thing. Ryan did. I can't wait to tell Atlas he'll be so pleased. So she's been completely radicalized at this point.
Yeah.
And is justifying all the people that are dying around her and also what they had to do to the little sisters to get the Atom from them. Because Ryan started this, not us. Okay. So this is actually really great because it did exactly what we've been talking about through this podcast. She abandoned the one pole for the other.
Yep.
And the two poles,
exactly. Yeah.
In terms of the hermetic law or principle of polarity that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
The two poles are really the same thing. She abandoned Ryan for Atlas. And Atlas and Ryan are on opposite sides of the
They're
political
both
spectrum.
just using her. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the end, they're both just using her. And in the end, they're both authoritarian. And in the end, they're both really not that far. They're really the same thing, just at different degrees.
And that's that one-dimensional thinking where it's like you have a continuum and it's just you're either one side or the other. And if you can, at the very least, open that up to 2D, right, you have more movement. It's not just one side or the other. There's an up and down as well now, right?
Yes.
But when you're thinking in that just that simple binary, you're just like, oh, I'm not this thing anymore. I guess I'm this thing, right?
And in the end, I mean, what was she trying to do when she was with Ryan? She was just trying to please him. She wanted to be accepted, and she wanted to please a man. That was what her whole motivation was, and it wasn't working out over there. So it wasn't really about ideals for her either. Really, when you boil down like what drove her, she couldn't please Ryan. But she can't wait to please Atlas. And in the end, she's not doing that either. She just doesn't realize, right? At either end, she's doing the same thing. In the end, both ends are the same for her, too. In the end, it's just about pleasing the man.
Things. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's justifying all of this for that, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're saying don't jump ship from one radical ideology for the other, because really you're just doing the same thing.
Yeah. Remember, I can't even remember how old I was. I was so young, but I was thinking like the opposite of 2 isn't -2. It's like green.
Yes,
and the opposite of left isn't right. The opposite of left is house, or I don't know. Like, because my idea when I thought of opposite, I'm thinking, oh, there's the thing, and then there's the farthest possible thing that exists away from that thing, which would be in an entirely different category.
A truly different thing. Yeah.
Yes, and that was me as a young kid. I actually have a tendency to be too literal. I think very literally about things. I didn't understand what an opposite was, and basically an opposite is the same thing, just the other side. And once I understood that, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Right. Okay, so we get to Point Prometheus. This is the final area of the game. This is where you see Frank Fontaine for the first time. You kind of start chasing him here at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of like, throwing stuff in the way as you're like running after him. He says, last chance, kid. You pack it in now. I'll leave this dump to you and Frau Kraut, which is he's referring to Tenenbaum, right? So you leave me alone, I'll leave Rapture to you. You keep coming, and Rapture's a fish tank. I'll destroy the place. Similar to the thought process of Ryan. Like, if I can't have it, I'll burn it to the ground, whether it's his national forest or whether it's Rapture, whatever. Frank Fontaine's ready to do the same thing here. So then Tenenbaum's pissed, you let him get away. I need a moment for thinking. Of course, this will be no problem. Find a big daddy and search his body. I would suggest you to be finding one. So essentially what happens here in this last section is she wants to dress you up like a big daddy. That includes not only the suit, but also the pheromones that attract the little sisters and bond them to you, or bond them to the big daddies. She wants to get you all dressed up like that so that the little sisters can guide you through a section that'll get you to Fontaine, and so that you'll have the power, hopefully, in that suit to be able to fight Fontaine as the final boss of the game. So this is all kind of leading up to the final boss of the game, which is going to be Frank Fontaine. So this section is all kind of about collecting the pieces in order to transform yourself into a big daddy. Now, I do have a question on this, and maybe Rob or somebody else who's here live will be able to answer this, because generally when people were bonded to the big daddy suits, it was like you don't walk out of that. It's like a one-way street. You transform into this and there's no going back, because like you become like the suit becomes part of your body. It's like grafted to your skin. So I don't think that's what happens with Jack here. So is it just that he puts on the suit but he doesn't do whatever the process is to graft it to him, but he just looks like a big daddy and he has the pheromones on, so the little sisters are like tricked into bonding with him? Or but they talk about it, or I'll read what Suchong says here in a bit. Suchong talks about it as if once you put on this suit, there's no taking it off. So I was a little confused on that point, because clearly in the ending, Jack has taken the suit off at some point. So I just had a little bit of confusion on that. So maybe somebody listening live will be able to answer that for me. But I'm just throwing it out there at the beginning.
I'll let you know.
Okay. So marketing gold. This is one that comes from Andrew Ryan. I'll admit Fontaine showed some foresight when he built up the plasmid business, but the man really never understood sales. Hiding those little girls beneath a bushel? I've just seen the preliminary design work on the new plasmid machines, and they're exactly what I wanted. Mark my words, presented properly, those little sisters are marketing gold.
Great. Hiding under a bushel. Once again, it's religious terminology that's being...
Yep. He does so much of that. He really speaks like some kind of like prophet or...
right, something like that. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, yet he's so anti-religious, right? Claims to be, right? Like he bans Bibles and hates what's that group called again in Arcadia? The
Saturnine.
The Saturnine cult, right? He's like all about snuffing them out, and no, there's no gods here. But like he talks so much like a TV evangelist or something. It's just like, holy crap, dude. Yeah, you're exactly what you hate. You're on the polar opposite side, but really you're kind of just the same thing at a different degree.
Exactly. Chocolate Rob has this great. He says he says he doesn't think it's permanent, the Big Daddy thing, but it just isn't clear. It's not clear.
Not clear.
Rob also said that Frank Fontaine, in creating the perfect assassin to take out Ryan, he created the perfect assassin to take himself out. Exactly. I think that's really good, because this is almost like Rapture in general. Andrew Ryan is able to subvert government by building Rapture in a place where government can't get to it. And he's like, all right, I figured out a way to build a thing that can avoid government intervention. And then he tries to use government intervention on the thing he built. Yes. And it doesn't work. So it's like, once again, you create the thing that does what you want it to do, but you don't have the foresight that it's going to come for you next, right?
Right. Okay, so next, this is just a quote from Frank Fontaine as you're moving through the level. You think turning yourself into one of those tin men is a two-way street? The Kraut's holding auditions for the Frankenstein parade, and you're first in line. So he's the one who kind of begins to tell you, like, there's no coming back from this almost, right? Like, you don't realize what you're really doing here. So why just girls? This is a diary from Tenenbaum. That's right. I know why it has to be children, but why just girls? This I cannot determine why, but I know it is so. Fontaine says, one less bathroom to build in the orphanage.
He would say that.
I know, right? It is amazing to watch the effect of Adam on their small bodies, their own cells replaced by the new stems the instant they are damaged. These children are practically invulnerable. It's a shame you could not do the same thing for an adult. There would be quite the market for a man you could not kill.
Of course.
Next one is called Cheap Son of a Bitch from Yi Su-chang. Fontaine, scary son of a bitch, but Ryan, cheap son of a bitch. So I should probably clarify here, and I think he does in a minute because he talks about the Japanese. I think he's Korean, and he was born during the time of the Japanese occupation of Korea.
The 30s, 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's Korean, just so people know that. You can not reuse a protector suit. You can't reuse it, he's saying. Take a man, graft his skin and organs straight into the suit. Otherwise, the suit doesn't work. Ryan says big daddies are too expensive. Ryan can suck an egg. So that's where I was kind of drawing this idea that you can't undo getting inside one of these suits. Now, my speculation on this is that Jack just puts it on, but it's not grafted to him. Therefore, it's not as powerful as if it was a big daddy, really.
Oh, sure. And also, it sounds to me like the grafting process, you would need another person for it. You wouldn't be doing it yourself.
Right. So I think that while Jack has the suit on and it gives him some added defense and power or whatnot, I think he's probably still not nearly as powerful in his big daddy suit as a real big daddy would be. That's kind of my speculation on that. That he wasn't grafted in that way, so he's not as powerful. What he's saying here is that the suits don't work unless you graft the skin and organs straight into the suit. So just something I was a little bit confused about there. Next one I have here is protecting little ones. Yi Su-chang says, war is a terrible thing. Japanese killed every man in my city except for Su-chang. Su-chang had opium, very good opium. This war is a terrible thing too, but not for Su-chang. Everyone's scared now. Everyone needs Adam, more than little sisters can make. Good news is we talked about scarcity, right? Everyone needs Adam, and more than the little sisters can make. There's scarcity for Adam. Good news is war makes lots of corpses. Su-chang knows a way to recycle Adam from the corpse, but can't send little sisters out to the streets unprotected. Su-chang must think on this. So this is where he got the idea of making the big daddies, to recycle Adam that was they could find in the bodies of the people who are dead. So we can't produce it fast enough with the little sisters alone, with the little slugs in their bodies, so we can recycle it from dead people. But we can't send these little girls out by themselves, so we need an answer to that. This is where the Big Daddy protection program came from. Next one is called Mistakes. I've been waiting to get to this one. This is one of my favorite. This is probably my favorite audio diary in the whole game because it really drives at the real point that we've been talking about. Andrew Ryan says, could I have made mistakes? One does not build cities if one is guided by doubt. But can one govern in absolute certainty? I know that my beliefs have elevated me, just as I know that the things I have rejected would have destroyed me. But the city, it is collapsing before my... Have I become so convinced by my own beliefs that I have stopped seeing the truth? Perhaps. But Atlas is out there and he aims to destroy me and destroy my city. To question is to surrender. I will not question. He was so close.
He was
so close to the point. And ultimately his fear won out.
Well,
so
yeah, that was good.
That's it. To me, that's like the climax. That's like the pinnacle of what this story is about right there, wrapped up all in one audio diary.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what the game's about right there. And he could not look at himself in the mirror, going back to our last game, Silent Hill 2, in the way that he needed to and the way that all of us need to. We've got to be able to look ourselves in the mirror for real. And Andrew Ryan couldn't. He couldn't look at himself. Wasn't able to accept what he would have seen there. Okay, next one from Frank Fontaine. This is not an audio diary. This is him talking to you. I've got the Rapture now, or I've got Rapture now. I've got the Atom now. You think that tin suit's even half enough to put the scare on me? Where are you going to go? Your life, your family? They're a fairy tale, kid. No more real than something you read about in the Saturday Evening Post. Poor bastard, a motherless freak whipped up in half-baked science experiment. Now, when someone starts talking to you this way, it's pretty evident that they are scared. So he's sitting there trying to tell you about, you think that tin can's enough to scare me? And then he starts berating you like this because he is scared. And he's going after as much Adam as possible because he's really scared.
Yes.
It's obvious
he knows what's coming.
Yeah, he knows he knows what he made in you. He knows he made the perfect assassin. He knows the perfect assassin's coming after him. So yeah, he's scared. Yeah. He's definitely scared. He says here, that's it, kid. It's been a long road. You don't even remember most of it. Put you on a sub when you were just a sprout. I really wound you up with that wife and child bit. Oh, me poor Myra. Me wee baby Patrick. Maybe one day I'll get me a real family. They play well with the suckers. This is what we were alluding to a little bit earlier in terms of the fact he never had a family. So that whole scene where he's, freaking out, his kid and his wife burned alive in that bathysphere. That's not his real family. He never actually had a family.
No, he didn't. And he just, I have this image too. This is great. I have this image of, because when you can go to a place around, I think where Atlas, in like Atlas's room, I guess, where you can see the statue of a poster of Patrick and Moya next to a dartboard, right?
Yeah.
And you can almost imagine that Atlas is kind of making this up as he's going, right? And I think the dartboard, there's darts thrown at a picture of Jack, a picture of our character, right? It's like his face is like, darts are being thrown at his face. And I can almost like see Atlas just kind of making things up, looking around him. Oh yeah, my kids. Yeah. They're Patrick and Moira. Yeah, there you go. And all the while, just like leaning back in a recliner, just throwing darts at Jack's face and just like, yeah, oh no, my kids. Oh, they're about to die. Oh man. And then boom, another like bullseye right in Jack's eye, and just like making it up as he goes. I don't know. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So Chocolate Rob says it is Ryan's face, but they're crossbow bolts. So it wasn't a dartboard. It was he was shooting crossbows at a picture of Jack's face.
Andrew Ryan,
it says Ryan's face. Okay, so this is Andrew Ryan. I thought it was Jack for some reason.
Okay, so he's shooting crossbow bolts at Jack
Ryan's
Ryan.
face. Well, right next to the poster of Patrick and Moira. I just feel like there's a connection there.
Yeah, for sure. That's hilarious. Okay, so now we get another one from him. He's exhilarated at this point because he got the atom now. Don't know what I was thinking. Never spliced up once the whole time I was down here in this aquarium.
Right.
Figured it was bad to mix business with pleasure. But, forget all the nose candy and floor polish I've been wasting time with. This stuff is the mother's milk. So he had never actually spliced before, even though he had started Fountaine Futuristics, and had been selling this stuff.
Yeah, and he never actually used the product ever. This is actually very similar. This is an article from probably 10 years ago, but I'm sure it may still hold true today. There was some survey done of a bunch of executives at tech companies, and it turns out that tech executives limit the screen time that they allow for their children, like severely.
Oh, wow.
So they're making the tech that is getting everyone else addicted, but they don't use it much themselves, and they sure as heck don't let their kids use it nearly as much as your average Joe Schmo, right? And so I feel like there's like a connection there.
Oh, totally. That's actually a really good real-life parallel.
It's very good. And I can't remember. The study was done maybe 2013, 2014. But yeah, it's specifically the people creating this stuff. They don't let their kids use it.
Well, think about all the products. I mean, even ones that are like knowingly like super unhealthy, like cigarettes. The people who produce cigarettes, like, do those guys smoke?
Yeah.
Yet they'll...
Maybe some, but probably not really very many.
Yeah, right. It's like, how many of these people who know how damaging their products are to people's health and to people's mental health and to society in general, they're making money on it. Again, this is another probably good or fair, I should say, criticism of capitalism, aren't using this stuff themselves. They're totally aware of how damaging this consumerism is, this consumerist society we live in is. Yet the capitalist market thrives on the consumerism, right? And we were talking about this a little bit off camera last week too.
Yeah. We should have
how bad, how awful consumerism is, and how much.
Yeah,
I think most people really recognize that.
They
Yet
do.
how much our economy depends on it.
It's literally it's a consumer economy. I mean that's what it is.
Yeah.
And consumer economies will tilt towards consumerism as almost as an ideology, and you got to find something to kind of keep yourself away from that, because naturally you're just going to fall right into it.
Yeah. Okay, so Frank Fontaine goes on, that might be plenty for the worker scrubs and the pencil pushers, but I need more. I want to splice till there ain't nothing left to splice with. So he's going, I mean, excuse the expression, but balls deep with this splicing thing here. He's in the deep end. He's in the deep end at this point. Not at all.
You can almost imagine somebody, it's their first time ever doing it, and they just completely overdo it. And it's like, dude, you're setting yourself up, man. This isn't.
Yeah, this is obviously not leading somewhere good.
Yeah, clearly. You see, this is kind of a trope in a lot of cartoons, or I'm trying to think of a specific one where it's like somebody's using more power, and they just don't realize they're just destroying themselves. Yeah. I don't know. It's got to be. I've seen it 100 times, I think.
Yeah. I agree. Okay, so we got Tenenbaum here saying, you must use the needle of the little sister. So this is after you've been following the little sisters. I kind of like this because there was actually a quote I didn't take here where the little sisters are kind of guiding you and getting you into places you wouldn't be able to get otherwise, right?
Yeah.
But along the way, they find corpses, and they're just programmed to farm Adam and recycle Adam from them. And I think Tenenbaum says something like, they can't help it, but like this is going to attract splicers to them once they start taking the atom from these corpses. Please protect them. But it's like the little sisters are so programmed to do that even though what's really supposed to happen is they're supposed to guide you into where Fontaine is, they can't help themselves when they see a corpse. They're like, I got to go take the atom from it.
Yes.
And then you got to like fight off all the splicers.
I know, you have to protect them. That's crazy. I feel like it's around here when Tenenbaum is just like, even though you've helped them out a lot, they are permanently screwed up, and it's completely my fault, and I will never find forgiveness. Yeah. And this is Dr. Tenenbaum talking. In fact, you probably put this quote down somewhere else, but I think now's a good time as anywhere else to read it. She says, "For such sins as this, we can never atone."
Yeah.
I feel like Tenenbaum has come to a point where she's rejected, the extreme where she was at. She's rejected the what would you call it? Just the moral-less possibilities of human existence. And it almost feels like she's talking about atoning for sins, right? She's speaking religiously again, and it's like she's accepted a type of God in some form or another. And that she feels like she will be punished for what she's done now. And that's, how would you put it? That's like, first off, it's against Andrew Ryan's rules, right? No gods, right? So she's breaking the rules even more. But these things are just kind of naturally finding their way back into her life. It's not like she had a conversion, or it's not like she read the Bible or whatever. This is all happening against her will, just kind of naturally, just like flowing into her mind and her body, and she can't do anything to stop it.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. Super well done. The Tenenbaum arc character.
Very. I love her character.
Yeah. I think on this playthrough, I'd say she's my favorite character in the game.
Me too. She's evil and deserves life in prison, but I think she's my favorite character in the game.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, okay, I don't know about evil. She's whatever. She deserves life in prison, and we can talk about evil or not later.
We talked about this in our last podcast.
She was evil, that's for sure.
Silent Hill 2, right? Where
yes,
is there really such a thing as good and evil, or is there just a spectrum of brokenness upon which people find themselves?
You go.
When we realized Tenenbaum came from concentration camps, and we talk about the struggles of her life.
That's fair. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, at least she was able to see, to do what Ryan wasn't able to do, which is the great contrast between them. Ryan had the chance. He was standing at the mirror. He was ready to look at himself, and then he chose not to.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah. Tenenbaum looked herself in the mirror and said, "This is wrong. Well, I am not correct. There are so many things I'm wrong about here." And Ryan refused to do that.
He refused to do it. Even though he
that's
kind of knew it. He knew it, but he refused, to
yeah,
take that
and
step.
and really, I'm almost finding the same core message from both the games we just played, whether it's Silent Hill 2 or this, is that you've
I
got
love
to
it when
be
that happens.
willing. I know you've got to be willing to look yourself in the mirror for real,
Yeah.
and admit where you're wrong and admit your faults and be
Yes.
ready to accept that. And
And like
those
I
who
mentioned, are you still gonna end up serving life in prison? Yeah, probably, but that's not the point, right? Like, the point is to kind of like come to an acceptance of yourself and where you're at, and to try to, well, like she said, she's trying to atone for her mistakes, right? Trying to make things right.
yeah. So, yeah, great stuff. Okay, so you have to use the needle of the little sister to drain Fontaine of his atom. It's the only way to defeat him. So this is kind of the gimmick of the final boss fight here, is that he's going to be up in a thing, like in a little device, and he's going to be like infusing himself with atom. And you go up there with one of the little sister needles, and you drain the atom from him and weaken him, and then you fight him for a bit. He goes back into it to try to recharge. You go drain more atom from him. You fight him for a bit, and you do this a certain number of times until you defeat the boss.
Yeah.
I think it has to be said, this is something that many people agree about. This final boss is not great.
It's not, but the way that it ends, when after a while the little sisters show up and they just like I loved it. I really did. I thought it was so fun. There was a comedic aspect to it, but also just a gratuitous, like horrific kind of scene happening in front of you. But I thought it was wonderful. It made me laugh out loud, but at the same time, like, what a great, entertaining way to end this game. I thought it was wonderful. And they're just like stabbing him with these huge freaking needles. Oh man, it was jacked.
And there's almost a sense of like righteous vengeance in it. Like the little sisters are the ones that finally get him. They do him in with the very method for which he programmed them to harm and recycle others. You know, it's like he meets the same fate as what he programmed them to do to others, they do to him. Which feels really good. It feels really good to see that happen at the end.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah,
he programmed Jack to do something. We do it to him. He programmed the little sisters. They do it to him, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All the things that he set these other people's up. Yeah. He sows what he reaped, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so it feels really good in the end, in that sense. And despite how short the ending is, I think Rob said it's like 30 seconds long. it feels very rushed. This whole boss fight and ending feels very rushed in terms of pacing. Like it just like really just feels like it just rushes into the end and it's over. And so like I think it's fair to criticize it for that. And I think the boss fight's way too easy. I don't like that they just turned Fontaine into this like Adonis like monster. That you know, it just feels kind of, I don't know, generic and cliche.
It kind of did.
It doesn't feel like a super memorable design or something that feeds more into the theme of the game somehow. So I don't think it's great. I think that the end of the game definitely feels rushed. But there are certain elements of this ending that really touched me, actually. I thought it was really, really well done.
Yeah, it was satisfying. I thought it was very well done. I loved the last part with the little sisters, with the seeing that he was able to bring them up to the surface and give them a life that had been denied to them below. And Dr. Tenenbaum says that I think he found in the end what he was looking for, which was family, which was meaning, right? Which is purpose, which is, other people existing socially in a communal effort, not just an individualistic, selfish sense, but like more of an altruistic kind of communal, small scale, just a family, but still living with other people and having that type of meaning imbuing your life. I think that was really good, really powerful. I thought it was great at the very end. You can talk about that. I just have a question about what happens if you don't save the little sisters.
Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure, because there's a whole other ending. But also how what Jack ended up choosing kind of was the opposite of the virtue of selfishness, right? That is sort of at the core of Ayn Rand's objectivism and Andrew Ryan's philosophy, therefore. And how now, I don't think this was as well implemented into the gameplay as it could have been. We talked about that already earlier when we talked about the first little sister that you choose to rescue or not. But the fact that, what she says is, I'll just read her dialogue. They offered you the city, and you refused it. And what did you do instead? What I have come to expect of you. You saved them. You gave them the one thing that was stolen from them, a chance to learn, to find love, to live. And what was your reward? Now, this would have been perfect if there had been no reward for saving the little sisters.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. That was my point. Yeah.
Yes. This would have landed so much stronger for me, I think, had there been no gameplay reward for saving the little sisters. So you get no Adam at all. Right. And you can't upgrade your powers, and you can't get, all those extra things, extra health or whatever. You're just forever locked out of ever upgrading with Adam. Like, this would have been a lot stronger to me had that been the case. But the fact that you still get a lot of Adam for saving them, maybe not as much as you would have gotten, but you still get a lot.
Somebody did the math. It's like 92% of the Adam when you factor in the plasmids and the extra kind of, bonus stuff that you get. It's like almost 100%, but not quite.
It's not like that much of a penalty, really, in the end. And that, I think, hurts the game's theme overall. And that's my one big criticism of Bioshock is that. Like, had they given you absolutely no reward whatsoever for saving little sisters, this would have really been beautiful to me in the end. It still is, but it would have been even more so, like to another level. But what I really loved about it was how they show the little sisters like having rings put on their fingers and getting married. And then they show Jack kind of on his deathbed, and you see one of their hands with the ring on it, like touch his arm.
Oh, yeah.
As like, I loved that shot. I thought that shot was amazing. It really touched me during that scene. And it kind of really brought this together in a beautiful way for me. So, you gave them a chance to learn, go to school, I think that shows them, graduating, diploma, whatnot. Yeah. To find love, getting married, to live. And what was your reward? And that's when they show her hand touching him as he's on his deathbed.
So the reward being you don't die alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And people, especially when you're younger, it's hard to fathom what the future holds, what things are going to be like whether or not, I don't know, the choices that you make when you're young affect the future. And a lot of people, when they're very old and are alone, wish that they had made different decisions when they were younger. Yes. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And then what was your reward? And you see that happen. She says you never said, but that's how we make the connection. But I think I know. A family. Beautiful. Beautifully written. Really short, a bit rushed, but beautifully written and executed nonetheless. So that brings us kind of to the end of the game as far as that ending goes. There are two other endings. Really, it's only one, but Tenenbaum reads the dialogue a little bit differently. So if you harvest every single little sister in the game, she's like more forcefully angry at you when she reads it. If you harvest more than one, so let's say you just did two, I think, you'll still get this other bad ending, but she just won't be as pissed as she is otherwise. I think that's the way it works. But in any case, what ends up happening is the little sisters are there at the end with Fontaine as they took him down. They take him down the same way. So they save your life as you fight Fontaine. And then you harvest all of them right there, which is even more freaking brutal. Right?
I just can't play the game like that. I will never. I can't do it.
I was just like mouth agape when I saw that. I was like, oh my gosh. They save your life and then you kill them anyways and harvest all their Adam.
If any of you did that, you are a dark person.
Yeah, so I mean, I was watching this just to prepare for this, and I was like, "Oh, dude, I hate this ending."
Wow, that is messed up.
But then he basically takes all the technology. Jack takes all the technology, all the Adam, all the powers, and he takes that to the top world and uses it to get the nuclear secrets, and it leaves off on this really ominous foot, like he now has nuclear power plus all of his atom power from Rapture, and he's going to start using that to take over the world, kind of thing, right? Kind of leaves off on that note. So I hate that ending. It's horrible. I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. Yes, and I love the other one because it's beautiful. So
because it's beautiful and I love it.
Yeah. So that's it as far as my notes go. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or anything you read in the comments we want to read before we take off?
There was a brief thing in Andrew Ryan's office. There's an R underneath the globe. This was pointed out by a coworker of mine, actually. There's an R underneath the globe. You'll see these globes occasionally throughout the game, but in his office, it has an R under it, which I guess would stand for Ryan, but it would be something along the lines of Ryan seeing himself as that Atlas figure that holds up the globe. Instead of the shrug and walk away and let things go as they will, Ryan kind of reinserts himself right back under the globe, and he's holding it up. And of course, it's too much to bear, and he is eventually crushed by the weight of holding up the entire society. The idea behind something like Ayn Rand's philosophy is that, it's an equal distribution. It's one person isn't risen up and controlling everything, but Andrew Ryan put himself there, and that's shown in the the R underneath the globe there in his office.
Right. That's actually really good.
It's pretty good. And yeah, that's it. That's the only note that we didn't really read. This game is really, really good, and I wish I didn't bog the podcast down as much. I still wanted to bring it up, but as much with the countering Ayn Rand, because I'm excited to play Bioshock 2 now. Or sorry, countering Ken Levine, I guess, countering the game's thesis with the antithesis, because it seems like I'll end up having to do the same thing for the next game too now.
Yeah. Right.
But I look forward to eventually playing Bioshock 2 and then Infinite, of course.
Yeah.
Bioshock is something else. I wasn't expecting that type of gameplay to give me a story that was that good.
I know, right?
Maybe something like Half-Life 2, or there's some games that have a similar type of gameplay that can do pretty well in the story end. It's not very common though. And I was probably the most surprised by that playing this game, but I absolutely loved it.
Me too. It's not my type of game. I mean, I commented on this back in episode 1. Like, listen, guys, I know that a lot of us here are RPG players, and we're much more into that style of gameplay. We're not maybe shooter fans. I'm the first to admit I'm not good at shooters. I don't like them. Gameplay wise. That's just not fun to me. I don't like the first-person perspective generally in games.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is, by all accounts, not my kind of game, yet it's one of my favorite games of all time. And it's because the story really is that powerful. It really is filled with that much human content that's really important, that everybody should be considering. To the same level as, super well written. To the same degree as something like Silent Hill 2 or any of these other games that we all recognize and love and admit are works of art on that level. Even though this was a mega million seller, hugely popular first-person shooter game where you typically don't expect that, it really delivers on that end, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. So that's it. That's going to wrap it up for our analysis of Bioshock. Thank you for joining us next week. We've actually already recorded this episode. Our first episode of Final Fantasy VI, the development history of Final Fantasy VI.
And it's
Look forward to that. Yeah,
me too. I'm excited.
I'm feeling really good about that podcast based on how the first episode went. So look forward to that. Thank you for joining me, Kason, although it's a Sunday night and we had to do it separately. But, we got it done, and that's what's important. So we'll see you guys next week. Peace out.